I did exactly what my CTO asked me to do during a merger. I brought structure, accountability, transparency. And within weeks, I quietly lost influence with half the leadership team. Not because I did it wrong, but because I made the right things visible at the wrong altitude. If you've ever been penalized for transparency and couldn't explain why, this is probably what you ran into. Here's what most technical professionals are taught: be clear, surface problems early, keep everyone informed. That advice works early in your career. It gets you promoted, it builds trust, it signals competence. But at senior levels, something changes. Those same behaviors don't land as good leadership anymore. They land as risk creation. Not because clarity is wrong, but because the people receiving it are now accountable for what you just exposed. And accountability changes how information lands. Here's what this looked like for me. I was brought into an M&A with a brutally tight timeline. My CTO basically said, "This organization doesn't have the structure, Ola. Make it happen." So I did. I built timelines, I mapped dependencies, I sent weekly updates to the full leadership team. No surprises, full visibility. And from my perspective, this was exactly what senior leadership should look like. Then things shifted. I started noticing it in smaller ways. The controller, who had been responsive early on, grew very uneasy whenever I asked for updates. Conversations that used to be straightforward suddenly felt tense, careful. And around the same time, I noticed the CFO had started having parallel conversations with my boss. Not confrontational, not escalatory, just adjacent. That's when it clicked. My updates weren't just informative anymore. They were putting financial gaps and timelines into shared view. What I saw as coordination, they experienced as exposure. I thought I was helping the system move faster. They felt pressure of having to explain the variance upward. Here's what I didn't understand at the time. When I sent those updates, I wasn't just sharing information. I was creating paper trail leadership now had to respond to. For people who are already behind, that didn't feel like help. It felt like exposure. Because once something is visible at that level, it can't be quietly managed anymore. It has to be explained, defended, escalated. Transparency doesn't just reveal progress, it redistributes accountability. And people instinctively resist whoever just handed them more risk. And I've seen this pattern again and again. Someone introduces clarity, a dashboard, shared metrics, clear ownership. Everyone agrees it's a good idea until the moment that clarity puts someone's name next to a problem that they were handling privately. Then the language changes. Let's talk about timing. Perhaps we shouldn't pilot this. So the resistance isn't personal. It's about what your action just put on someone else's plate. Most professionals think influence comes from being right. It doesn't. Influence comes from understanding how responsibility moves when you act. When you introduce transparency, you're changing who has to answer publicly, who loses room to maneuver, who now has to commit. Senior leaders aren't reacting to your behavior, they are reacting to its implications. If you don't see that, you'll keep wondering why doing the right thing keeps costing you credibility. You're optimizing for correctness. The room is optimizing for control. After that merger, I stopped assuming transparency was neutral. I started asking one question: who becomes accountable for something they weren't accountable for yesterday? If the answer was a peer or my boss's peer, I knew I was redistributing risk. That didn't mean I avoided clarity. It meant I handled it differently. Before making something visible, I talked to them first. Not in a meeting, not shared via email, one-on-one. And I would say, I'm thinking about presenting this at the next LT. Here is why. How do you see it landing? That gave them space to absorb it, to shape it, to prepare for it. That is the difference between clarity that builds influence and clarity that quietly erodes it. I'm Ola. I work with senior technical leaders, and I see this pattern constantly. If this felt familiar, it's not in your imagination. You weren't wrong. You were just operating at the wrong altitude for how clarity actually works. Once you learn to see that distinction, you stop losing influence by accident.